today we're watching an ad from Простоквашино, one of Russia's favorite dairy brands. It's a go-to brand for dairy, slightly premium, widely available, and popular with just about everyone. It's famous because it borrowed the identity of a popular Soviet cartoon, one that people grew up with during the late Soviet years. It tells the story of a boy named Uncle Fyodor. He's 9, but so independent that even adults call him Uncle. He runs away from home with a talking cat, Matroskin, and later a dog, and they move into an abandoned house in a village. It's full of jokes about real life, trying to make money, finding food, dealing with shortages, but all in a funny, innocent way. In one episode, Matroskin pitches the idea of getting a cow for milk. Then they stumble upon a treasure and rent the cow instead. The cow gives so much milk that they end up storing it in the sink, but the cartoon very intentionally never says whether they sell that milk. You would think they might. They clearly need to support themselves, and selling milk would be the way to make some money, but the idea is just never brought up. And that makes sense because during the Soviet era, entrepreneurship was forbidden, but then this company turned this exact story into its origin myth. In the ads, Matroskin talks about the product. Sometimes he even gives a behind-the-scenes look at how they're made. This could be just my observation, but it really feels like the company is hinting that the characters are the actual owners of the farm and the dairy production. I think it's a clever way to market the brand, especially because in the original story, they work really hard, but they're limited by things outside their control. So placing them now in the present day running a successful business feels like a nice full circle moment, like their hard work finally paid off. And this kind of branding where a big national company builds its identity on something culturally familiar feels very similar to how brands operate in the United States and other Western countries. I'm thinking of food brands especially, oats, cereal, anything with a family farm vibe. On a surface, Простоквашино fits right in with those brands, except for one thing. In places like the US, you can usually trace a brand back to its founders. There's a story, someone took a risk, started small, and built something. You can find out who they were, how the company grew, it's open. But that's not really the case with Простоквашино. The brand was created in post-Soviet Russia, a time when the country was supposedly moving towards a free market and open competition. And while it was started by individuals, to this day, there is surprisingly little public information about who they actually were. It's ironic, a brand that celebrates the idea of entrepreneurship while its own backstory remains unclear. And that's not unique to Простоквашино, which makes you wonder, was the company built on real creativity and risk, or just the right connections? But despite all of this, dairy remains everyone's favorite, and they actually funded a sequel to the original cartoon, so now Uncle Fyodor has a little sister, and the gang is back together. The company is also very active on social media. They post short videos where the characters share recipes or promote their products, kind of like animated influencers. So we're about to watch one of those recipe ads right now.
Вера Павловна, нельзя конфетами завтракать.
The baby girl, Fyodor's little sister, is being called not just Vera, but Vera Pavlovna. That second part is her patronymic, отчество in Russian, and it tells us her father's name is Pavel. If you've been learning Russian for a while, you might recognize that structure. Patronymics are formed from your father's first name. For men, it ends in vich, and for women, it's vna. It's not a middle name. You don't get to choose it, and you can't leave it out. It's automatically part of your legal identity in Russia, but it doesn't even appear on your international passport, so it's mostly used inside the country. Patronymics are used to show respect, sort of like the Russian version of saying Mr. or Ms. You would use it with teachers, colleagues, neighbors, or really anyone in a formal setting. I mentioned this in a previous video. Over Russian history, the ways people address each other have changed depending on who was in power. We had tavarish that lasted through the Soviet years. These days, it's the name plus patronymic. That is the default format. So Vera Pavlovna is a toddler in a home setting, yet she's being addressed like a serious adult. It's a running joke in the Простоквашино universe. Her brother was called uncle because he acted so grown up, and now she's got that same energy. She might be tiny, but she's confident, commanding, and totally in charge. So calling her just Vera doesn't feel quite right, so she's Vera Pavlovna, who's being scolded for trying to eat sweets for breakfast. Нельзя конфетами завтракать might sound a little strange at first if you're used to English structure. In Russian, завтракать is actually a verb. It means to breakfast, not just to have breakfast. So instead of saying I eat breakfast the way we would in English, in Russian just say я завтракаю. So завтракать конфетами literally means to breakfast with candies. Конфеты, while the word translates to candies, in Russian it usually refers to chocolate candies. At least this is my impression. The kind that are individually wrapped and sold by weight in big bins at the supermarket. They're considered a bit of a treat, at least in my household, usually saved for after meals, not something you're supposed to sneak first thing in the morning, which is exactly what kids often try to do, tiptoe into the kitchen and grab a handful before the adults notice. The word нельзя doesn't mean you can't in the sense of you're not able to, it means you're not allowed to.
Это почему?
Растущему организму кальций нужны витамины, а они в твороге есть.
The dog, Sharik, jumps in with a confused little protest. Это почему? He doesn't just say почему, which means why. He says это почему. Это, at the beginning, adds something extra. In Russian, you can use это like this when you're reacting to something with surprise or disbelief. It draws attention to what was just said, like you're pointing at it and going, now hold on, what is this rule? It's not the most formal way to speak, but it's common in everyday speech. Sharik is more innocent and carefree than Matroskin. He doesn't really see the harm in having sweets for breakfast, and he's genuinely confused by the scolding. Растущий организм. It's one of those things that just doesn't translate well. It literally means growing organism. But in everyday Russian, it just means a child, someone who's still developing and needs proper food and sleep to grow up healthy. It's just the way adults refer to children, like you're still developing, so you need proper food, sleep, vitamins, кальций и витамины. Definitely not candy for breakfast. Kids growing up in Russia hear this phrase all the time. Parents love to use it when they're trying to make you eat something healthy or scold you for staying up too late, like you're растущий организм, so you need to take care of yourself. This whole sentence sounds exactly like something an adult would say, which makes it funny coming from a cat, but that's kind of the point. In the show, the cat was always the practical, nurturing one, so of course he's the one telling the baby she needs calcium and vitamins. In which she seems completely uninterested.
Эх, жалко, что конфет с кальцием не делают.
And then the dog goes, Эх, жалко. That ech, it's such a theatrical little sigh. People don't usually talk like this. If someone's annoyed or disappointed, they probably just say blin. But ech adds this kind of gentle, performative sadness. It has if only sort of vibe, like if only they made candy with calcium. Эх, жалко. What a shame they don't make healthy candies.
Тогда Вера Павловна каждый день бы ими завтракала.
Шарик, ты гений! Снимай!
And then we get this line. By the way, Sharik literally means little balloon, but for a long time it was a kind of go-to name for any stray dog in the Soviet Union. No one really named their dog Sharik on purpose. It was more like if you saw a scruffy dog wandering around, chances are someone would call it Sharik by default. And if you've read Master Margarita, you might know the author Bulgakov also wrote a novella called Heart of a Dog. And sure enough, the main character who starts out as a stray is named Sharik. That's probably the most famous Sharik in Russian literature. And our Sharik used to be a stray before he found his home, so it fits. Снимай is the command form of снимать, which means to film or to shoot video. As I mentioned earlier, the show has these little modern twists. Matroskin has basically become a vlogger now, and Sharik just gave him a great content idea. They're about to start making a new kind of candy.
Творог, клубничка, сгущенка, посыпка.
Matroskin starts listing the ingredients. That's cottage cheese, strawberries, condensed milk, and sprinkles. Healthy food disguised as dessert, something that might actually tempt a baby who doesn't want to eat anything healthy. Klubnichka is the cute version of klubnika, the word for strawberry. In Russian, adding little endings like this is a way to make words sound softer or more affectionate, sort of like how in English we might say dog, but also doggy or kitty instead of cat. And полезный, while it literally means useful, is what Russians use to describe food that's good for you, healthy and nutritious. Полезный. Посыпка means sprinkles. So yes, this is cottage cheese in disguise topped with candy sprinkles.
Вкусные полезные конфеты готовы.
Творошарик. Это для моего растущего организма.
When Sharik tastes the final result, he immediately grabs one for himself and says, "Это для моего растущего организма." Sharik is very much not a growing child. We already talked about how растущий организм is something parents say when trying to make kids eat healthy, but over time the phrase also picked up a second meaning. When food wasn't always abundant, adults would often save the best things for the children. It was a quiet way of showing love. That's why later in life, when people treat themselves to something indulgent, a slice of cake, a candy they probably don't need, they sometimes say, "Это для моего растущего организма." So it's a playful excuse, even if you're clearly no longer a growing child. That's the end of the video, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Oh, and actually, do you have brands like this in your country? You know, the ones that everyone grew up with and still loves. I would really love to hear about them, so feel free to share in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video. Пока-пока!